Well. It's Wednesday, May 31st, 7 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time to break out the hot seat. I'm Bob Harris. Look, I'm dialing that in. I mean, I was not too aggressive, was a little aggressive. I know you all loved aggressive Bob Harris. FootballDiehards.com is the website. We appreciate you joining us here every Wednesday at this time and every Saturday at noon Eastern time as well. Do our Ask Me Anything sessions. Always bring in a great guest. There's plenty of things going on right now. A lot to talk about. The OTAs give us tons of fodder, grist for our mill, and we have plenty to chat today about. So I'm going to bring on another fantastic guest. You've all known him from many websites. Now he's with one. I want to bring on Chris Allen, the fantasy analyst and content coordinator for Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. So Chris, we were talking a little bit before he came on. Like, we met a few years ago at the Expo. It was, kind of hit it off right from the get-go. And you've just been adding all these sites, and I think you were up to probably, I want to say close to 10 sites there at some point. Now you're down to one. How does it feel? Are you totally all your time totally freed up?
Oh yeah. So I got on. So I talked with Matthew. I just happened to run into him at the combine. We had a quick conversation. He brought me on. He was like, "Yeah, Chris, seen some of your stuff. Love to have you on, but you won't have to do any additional work. We just want to have Chris Allen, the brand, not really Chris Allen, the content creator." No, I'm just playing. They keep me going, man. It has been nonstop since the combine, because, I mean, you know how it is. Once the combine's over, we're talking about the draft and then the rookie profiles, and then just thinking about how teams are going to figure out what they're going to do in the upcoming season. But even after the draft, I mean, shoot, it's been like a month since the draft, and now it's figuring out the fallout. What does everybody think about Jordan Addison now as the potential second wide receiver or complement to Justin Jefferson? Is Jackson Smith and Jigba the wide receiver one in Seattle, or is it Tyler Lockett working behind DK Metcalf? All of the different things. Devon Achane, now RB1 season in Miami. So it's just all of those questions that get posed now that we know what teams are doing. That requires more debate. That requires more content. And so now, especially with best ball being the biggest thing throughout the summer, now we're talking about ADP, week 17 stacking, late round darts. I mean, just the content mill never stops, and we never stop over at Fantasy Life. So no, I don't get any breaks, because there are no breaks. There's no off season. It's just content season from sun up to sundown, all the way up until, what do we got, 99 days until
99 days.
The regular 99 days until the kickoff. So it's just, I'm just waiting for that to start, so we actually have actual data to talk about versus us just arguing and debating all day long on social media.
Say hello to everyone in the chat. I appreciate y'all coming. Golf Boy, Andrea, Robert, Dame, Golf Boy. Look, it's a great crowd. You'll have questions. If you're new here, we do this every week. As I mentioned, 7 p.m. every Wednesday on the Hot Seat. Bring in a great guest like Chris or somebody. And the same thing on Saturdays for an Ask Me Anything session. We'd like you to hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, hit the like button. I'm going to hit the dislike button as I always do, just so if everyone wants to, that ice is now broken. All right. Hey, Royal, glad to see you. If you have questions, you know the drill. I'll get to them as I get to them. You mentioned best ball. I know you have recently jumped in. Unlike me, you had the good sense to wait until we have a little more clarity. Some of us are out there diving in. I was in February, and I feel like I've tried every single approach. You're just jumping in. What are you seeing in your early drafts that catches you off guard, or that totally validates everything you expected?
I would say the two biggest things that I've noticed so far. One is just the first few rounds. And I know that's really not a massive deal for a ton of people, because it's really, you're just following ADP for the most part. You might have a couple of guys that you have in front of another. You're thinking Derrick Henry is still going to be the guy, or you're really high on CMC, or whatever the case may be. T. Higgins over Jamar Chase, even though it's a wild statement to make, whatever. But for the most part, we're following ADP. But even just following ADP in the first 2 to 3 rounds, as compared to the 2022 season, it was about trying to get, let's say, 2 running backs in the first couple of rounds. Maybe pairing Aaron Jones with Joe Mixon, or getting Dalvin Cook and whomever. But now I'm seeing a lot more mid-round running back values that have changed how we approach the early rounds. You get Justin Jefferson at the first pick, or if you wind up getting a Jamar Chase, or if you have that ADP slot that's in the first like 5 or 6 picks in the first round, I'm not seeing a ton of running back or drafters taking a lot of running backs like thereafter. They might get one. You might get a running back in the second round just so you have somebody like an RB1 to fill in that slot. But still with guys like Antonio Gibson, let's even see like Cam Akers, or a couple other running backs that fall into the 7th, 8th round, not seeing a ton of need to draft like running backs at the higher end of the market like we were last year. So I found that really interesting. And like, have you seen that like in your, God, no, like you said, you've been doing it since February. Have you seen the same thing, Bob?
Yeah, see the same thing. A little bit of an evolution. Running backs at various times go a little quicker, but for the most part, that's been the thing. And then the value is pushed down. So you mentioned some of the guys you mentioned, as well as James Conner, Miles Sanders, still ridiculously cheap. And beyond that, there's still players that I still like going out. So I am hammering that value. It opens the door to early quarterback. I see a lot of people stacking, Stephon Diggs with Josh Allen, Travis Kelce, and Patrick Mahomes in these best balls, which I think is a pretty viable strategy. Even if it's early, you still feel like you're going to get some value out there. Where are you at on the early quarterback thing, and what is the cutoff? And then when do you dive back in if you miss out on that first tier?
I would say for me, the cutoff is probably around mid round 4, somewhere in there. Because by that point, how many quarterbacks are we through? At least like 5 or 6, if I'm remembering ADP correctly. Because at that point, I'm assuming by round 4, like Joe Burrow's typically gone. You're starting to dive into that like Justin Herbert-ish like type tier. So that's where you're kind of fighting for, like the QB 5-6 range, like somewhere in there. And I'm fine with that. I'm more than happy to try and take my swings on those guys, the ones that, and this is like the archetype that I try and shoot for when you are aiming to draft a quarterback that high. One, they're going to be a part of a team that's surrounded by, let's say, like the higher end pass catchers. So if you're drafting Joe Burrow, he's surrounded by guys like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Justin Herbert on the lower end of things, but still Mike Williams, despite the small back fracture we heard that was reported last week, Keenan Allen, assuming he's going to be healthy, surrounded by solid pass catchers, or they're more on the rushing side of things. So like Lamar Jackson, we know that he's going to, at the very least, be at the top end in terms of rushing attempts among all quarterbacks, has capable pass catchers in Mark Andrews. We'll see what Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham, and all that, what they do. But that's the archetype that I try and shoot for after that, or for the early round quarterbacks. And I think that's an easier way to try and create that tier and say that I just want efficient quarterbacks, I want pass-happy quarterbacks, or ones that can rush, because that's how we know fantasy production is made, at least at the quarterback position.
Royal Slade out in the chat saying, I like my drafts as wide receiver early more than running back early. He's been in a lot too, because I'm in a lot with him. The Football Diehards listeners, we've been starting up on a week. And I kind of feel the same as well. John Bonneville mentions last year in the draft, he took mid-round running back value he thought was good, but it didn't work out. Zeke into Elijah Mitchell into Chase Evans. I mean, I think that's the concern, right? I mean, first of all, circumstances can derail anybody, says Jonathan Taylor. Right. And so, and going in and as for Elijah Mitchell, nobody knew Christian McCaffrey was going to end up in San Francisco. So those are things we can't account for, but we're trying to force the action a little bit, if we're waiting later on these running backs. But I think some of the quarterbacks, like you get out of that tier, and I think I have like some distinctive tiers, that top 3 for sure. Joe Burrow kind of on a tier by himself, Lamar and Justin Fields, kind of the next bundle. Then you get into the Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert. I moved Deshaun Watson up into this next tier as well, and maybe I'm being a little aggressive on that. I'd like to hear what you think. Dak Prescott, kind of that group in there, and then you get outside of that into the Kirk Cousins and Tua Tagovailoa range, and then beyond. And we'll talk about some of the guys beyond. I think there's great value in all those tiers, right, depending on when you draft them. Curious what your thoughts are on Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns offense, what they might look like this season.
As a Bengals fan, I hope they're terrible. So that's what. But no, the easiest way to look at it is, at least in my mind, is that it can't get worse. And the way that the team positioned themselves in the offseason, it looks to me like they're assuming, or they're banking on, or they've seen some, some steps forward from Deshaun Watson that things will continue to improve. I mean, of course, bringing in David Njoku back, having him there, but also some of the additions they made over the offseason. I mean, the trade for Elijah Moore, we know that he can be an efficient slot receiver, so that should help in terms of having the higher percentage targets and being able to have a receiver that's capable of creating yards after the catch and doing that. That's good. I mean, an excellent compliment to one Amari Cooper, who is probably on the, I wouldn't say the back end of his career, but he's getting up there in age at this point in his career. So having an efficient compliment to Amari Cooper makes sense. Also having Donovan Peoples-Jones, field stretcher, but then they also draft Cedric Tillman as well in order to have just a depth to their passing game. So not just relying on, let's say, two strong pass catchers in Amari Cooper and David Njoku, so now they also add depth to that as well. So I'm of the mindset that with the way the team has kind of positioned themselves over the offseason, Deshaun Watson should play better. And if not from the passing standpoint, we knew that in his heyday in Houston, he was capable of rushing every now and again and getting a rushing touchdown, or at least having 10 to 20 yards added to his production. So with all that, I mean, combine all of that together, and even though Kevin Stefanski runs more of a conservative type of offense, if it is more efficient, or at least more efficient than it was last season, then yeah, Deshaun Watson should be a good value, and we should at least look at drafting him along with some of the pass catchers that he's attached to.
They did not pay him $230 million guaranteed to not throw the football. Your boss,
Exactly.
Matthew Berry, had a little bit about that after the combine. His impression talking to people around the combine was essentially they expect a lot more throwing. And so I'm kind of banking on that. I think there are safer, maybe safer plays, but Deshaun Watson, top 5 quarterback every season that he played, full season in Houston. So there is some hope there, and I'm looking to maximize the value there. Question from the chat. Tim Shirley wants to know what you think about DeAndre Swift this year as a mid-round sleeper. I want to get into some of these backfields as well, so this is a good entree into that. I'm leery. I don't feel like Philadelphia has used their running backs as receiving assets that much, unless you go back to Miles Sanders' rookie year. That's a lot where a lot of the value of DeAndre Swift was, and his limited workload in Detroit. Are you confident in and he's not overly expensive right now, but still, I find myself with a lot more Rashad Penny because he's the cheaper piece. Where are you at on that?
I agree with you, at least taking that approach, because for me, it's where am I going to get the closing line value, or not even closing line value. It's more about what's the chances that a guy like Swift is going to outkick his ADP, especially where it's being drafted at now. Do I think that he can meet his ADP? I think it's possible and be within, let's say, a few spots of it. Just given the projected workload for him, let's assume, or let's say that Rashad Penny misses a few games, or just with the way that the Eagles' offense is structured, being more run heavy, especially once they get into the red zone, without having a ton of targets available to him, because last season the Eagles were dead last in the rate of targets to their running backs. So can't project a ton of receiving work for him, but just given the nature of the offense, Jalen Hurts being explosive, having explosive receivers attached to that offense, then yeah, Swift should have a ton of cracks at getting into the end zone. But does that mean that he's going to have a ton of chances at, let's say, having a Jamal Williams type season where he's just falling into the end zone 2 times a week? I don't see that happening. So either he becomes more efficient of a rusher, which would be an outlier season for him, or he has more targets, which will also be an outlier season for him. Since I can't really see either happening for him, I'm with you, Bob. I would rather just take the guy that's cheaper and just assume that even if he carves out a smaller workload comparative to what Swift may get, he'll wind up actually having those touches in the red zone, maybe gets a couple of tuds here and there, and he winds up, again, outkicking his ADP. A higher chance of Penny doing that than DeAndre Swift, at least in my mind.
Right. I keep, reminding people who haven't been in here, people in the chat are all going to go, I've heard this before, but it is true. A number of beat writers talking to them in Philadelphia are all honing in on Rashad Penny for a big workload as long as he's in the locked and upright position. Ryan in the chat, which one will stay healthy, though? We don't know which one will stay healthy, and history tells us neither of them, but Bob Harris, injury agnostic, does not care. I'm going to take my chances and reap the value on those. Just quickly, Jim, for you, I rank Watson inside my top 10, so I think inside the top 15. Do you have him ranked inside your top 15, Chris?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's just right inside. So I think it's like QB 13 for me, somewhere in there, just right outside the top 12. But yeah, top 15 for sure.
Makes perfect sense. So here's what Golfway would like to know: where you would take Alvin Kamara in best ball. I will tell you this right now: I have in nearly 50 drafts 0 shares of Alvin Kamara right now. I feel like I can wait until I have more clarity on him, and at some point I can make the adjustment if need be. I'm investing in Kendra Miller in super late rounds, if at all possible. Less so in Jamal Williams. I just, maybe I'll miss out on that. I just kind of like try not to go after guys coming off huge touchdown seasons, and sometimes to my detriment, says Austin Eckler. It can work out. But for you on the Saints backfield, what would be your approach right now?
I'm fine at this point in the offseason of taking my swings on Alvin Kamara at cost, because just given where he's at, I would say the easiest analogy would be kind of where Joe Mixon's being drafted as of right now.
Yeah.
Just the level of uncertainty, like while of course Joe Mixon's situation is a little bit different, we've heard about some illegal issues with Joe Mixon, but still the NFL, I mean, the league has had access to the videotape regarding Alvin Kamara's incident. That's been made public for a number of months. But yet, if I'm remembering correctly, his trial isn't set until late July or something like that.
July
and it's already
31st.
been pushed. There we go. So it's already been pushed off. So if we haven't really heard anything regarding when the trial is going to be, when any sort of potential suspension is going to be put in place, for folks that, I mean, they probably know who Drew Davenport is at some point, or especially with all of the Deshaun Watson coverage that he provided. I mean, it's funny to me that we haven't really seen the league kind of step in and say yep, we already know about it. Regardless of the trial, we're just waiting for the trial to happen, all that. Haven't really heard anything. So at least in my mind, it does make some sense to take some swings on Alvin Kamara, given his value right now. Because let's say if they push this off, or let's say if it's a decision that the league defers until the end of the season, then now you've found yourself with a running back 1 that's drafted in round 6. So for right now, I'm okay with doing it. I wouldn't just go all in into every single draft, but if you want to have a small amount of exposure to him, it makes sense to me.
Toilets to Titles Network in the chat. Is that you, Coach? Other questions out there, we're going to get to those. I'll just say, just to give us a little perspective here on the ADP, I'll use the current best ball 10s ADP. DeAndre Swift, who we're talking about, is running back 19. He's going ahead of Javonte Williams, Cam Akers, Dameon Pierce, J.K. Dobbins, Miles Sanders, David Montgomery. Probably like all those better. Kamara goes at 26 after Montgomery. He's going ahead of James Conner, Rashad White, Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook, etc. And in that mix is A.J. Dillon. Look at Aaron Jones here going off as 18. Dillon going off as, what is the number, 31. How are you handling the Green Bay backfield, and what are your expectations for this offense with Jordan Love taking over?
That's a good question. I think my original thought was that without Aaron Rodgers, I mean, one of the best quarterbacks that I've watched in my lifetime, and probably the top 5 in the entirety of the NFL's history, losing him there has to be some sort of consequence in terms of how the team actually operates from an efficiency standpoint and all that. But I know that we've only seen Jordan Love for 2 passes, right? I mean, it's very minute amount of samples that we've been able to get for Jordan Love. I'm kind of okay with it. I think there's enough there for him, for Jordan Love as a thrower, but also he does have some rushing ability as well, that he might be able to keep the ship afloat, at least compared to the NFC North. And Chicago's defense, not what it used to be. Minnesota's defense, we know that their defense is in shambles. So is it possible that at least within the NFC North, they're capable of stringing together a few games, or at least keeping them high scoring or fantasy friendly enough that we get some production out of the running backs? Because between Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, I mean, prior to last season, A.J. Dillon was actually matching, if not beating, Aaron Jones in terms of receiving efficiency. Now, both had a down year last year, but if they wind up recapturing some of that magic, and with the, let's say, uncertainty regarding the pass catchers right now, Christian Watson is undoubtedly the Packers wide receiver 1. But after that, how many folks are hitching themselves to Romeo Doubs at this point? Do we believe in Luke Musgrave as a tight end rookie prospect? So to me, there's a chance that there are a number of targets that are up for grabs in that offense. Aaron Jones is going to get his, but I think the delta or the gap between him and A.J. Dillon is enough that if I miss on Aaron Jones in the earlier rounds, like we were talking earlier about that wide receiver value that we both like in like the first 3 to 4 or 5 rounds, I could get A.J. Dillon later and start to fill up my running back room with a running back that we know is going to definitely be used in short yard situations, definitely going to be used in the red zone, and also has some viability as a pass catcher. So I really do like where, at least at the very least, where A.J. Dillon's going right now. And I'll have to think a bit more on Aaron Jones, at least as how much exposure I want to him in best ball.
I don't have a lot of Aaron Jones exposure, and I'm starting to get some. And so just like there's a lot of chatter out here about James Conner, the James Conner disrespect is crazy to me, says JSC. Royal Slade, people think that expect the cars to be epically bad, and I agree with that. That's why Conner's value is falling. Yet as I look at my shares, I see a 42% roster share for James Conner. Yeah, I'll probably be dialing back a little bit soon, but at this point, I mean, I don't see anyone else in this offense, which kind of brings us to a point. DeAndre Hopkins is gone. Everyone wants him to land in Kansas City. Everyone. I don't know that it matters to me where he ends up. I'll judge it then. But let's say he did land in Kansas City. Can anyone there be a true wide receiver one? Could he emerge as that, working alongside Travis Kelce? Does Travis Kelce kind of limit the value of everyone in that receiving core?
I think I agree with you on this idea that Travis Kelce really does limit everybody as a wide receiver one. Who else, when it comes to bunched or stacked formations, with the way that the Kansas City offense has really tried to operate over the past few seasons? Even when they had Tyreek Hill, they would try and have 3 wide receivers bunched to one side, and then you would always need that backside receiver in the ISO type formation or ISO alignment, and that in order to beat that secondary coverage, and that would be Travis Kelce. So it's fine if they want to have DeAndre Hopkins, if they want to add him and try and label him as their wide receiver one. No issues there. But if more than likely DeAndre Hopkins is going to be the one to receive the primary defensive coverage, whichever CB1 is going to be on the defensive side, and there's going to be Travis Kelce working on that backside coverage. That's the way that they've operated. And so that's helped Travis Kelce become the tight end one for the past however many seasons, 3 seasons or however long, and that we've always come to just acknowledge it. Doesn't matter how old Travis Kelce gets. It's just that when he's a part of that offense, especially attached to Patrick Mahomes, he's going to get all of the targets and continue to be productive as a tight end. So I'm okay with, and I do think that in my mind, the market's going to, I guess, boost or steam up DeAndre Hopkins past what he should probably be valued at this point in his career, just because it's going to be Kansas City, it's going to be Patrick Mahomes and DeAndre Hopkins, and everyone's going to push him up to the 3rd round. I don't think he'll be able to match that ADP, just given the other receivers he'll probably be going around. But in my mind, if that does happen, I think that's where he's going to wind up at.
This is the thing the point that should not be overlooked. Any news you're hearing right now, we're hearing Breece Hall chatter today, very optimistic. Brock Purdy chatter today, very optimistic. If you're out there drafting in best balls, you will see these news tidbits reflected immediately in ADP. Usually someone in your league is out there listening to the same news you are, and someone will make a move based on this. I do think, by the way, Deshaun Watson, Cleveland, Buffalo, Giants, a lot of possibilities there, which means it'll probably be none of those. And so I'm glad. I am glad he got an agent, though. That's good for him. Sounds like he's making some moves there. So a few comments on a lot of interest in the Conner thing. The Cardinals are going to be without Kyler Murray for some time, so they'll pound the rock even more and still do it with Kyler Murray back, says JSC. I tend to agree with that. John Bonneville has learned his lesson about overlooking running backs on bad offenses. This is the point. He mentioned Swift 2 years ago, James Robinson, Pierce, Algier, etc. This is true. I'm saying the same thing about quarterbacks, wide receivers playing with quarterbacks. I feel like last year, I took a beating because I avoided players where I thought the quarterback situation wasn't ideal. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Amari Cooper, et al. Would like me to know that is not necessarily the case. So if we're taking that position there, what do we think about Chris Godwin and Mike Evans going fairly cheap, right? You're getting them outside, closer to wide receiver 3 range than wide receiver 1 range. Are we going to make? Am I going to make the same mistakes? I don't think I am. I think I'm going to be more willing to gamble. What about you?
Oh, I am too. And I think that's the right logic to at least apply when it comes to those types of situations, because I think we as drafters, I think we might subconsciously or maybe consciously, we double count what the market is already telling us. Just given where both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are going relative to where they have in the past, the market's already kind of telling us that we think that the Bucs offense is going to be bad. So that's okay. We already know that. They don't have Tom Brady as their quarterback. That's okay. But we don't have to then also on top of that then say, well, because they're already discounted, I'm also not going to draft them until they fall even lower, because it's probably not going to happen. But if I had to choose between the two, well, the easiest one is Chris Godwin, at least compared to where they're lined up or where they get deployed on the field. Mike Evans over the past 3 seasons, I think when Tom Brady first joined the Bucs, Mike Evans hit a career high in slot snaps. Like his slot rate just completely spiked up as compared to when Jameis Winston was there. They had the Ryan Fitzpatrick year, and all that stuff. And so we saw more fantasy production for Mike Evans, but that slowly ticked down over the past 2 years to the point where Chris Godwin's slot rate has started to climb back up, especially after he had that ACL tear in the end of 2021. So if there's going to be any sort of pass catcher that would kind of benefit from just this chaos that we see, whether it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be Kyle Trask. We'll see what Baker Mayfield, if he can do anything, or if he still has some of that magic left from, that primetime game when they won the Rams, comeback and all that stuff. If he could do something that's at least fantasy friendly or fantasy viable for the wide receivers, Godwin's the easier one for me, just given the way that Mike Evans plays the game at this point. And also, he's getting closer to that age cliff. I don't know if he has another year in him. Would he continue to just make 1,000 yards every single season, playing on the perimeter, playing that boundary type receiver? That's just from me, that archetype is something that I don't want to pay for at that early part of the draft. So I'll probably just stick with Chris Godwin if I'm going to draft either of the 2 Bucs receivers.
All right, if you just dialed in, this is the Football Diehards YouTube channel. I'm Bob Harris. He's Chris Allen from Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life, does great work. Truly a great analytical mind in this business. Love talking to him and hearing the detailed points of view, and I know you do as well. So, by the way, John Bonneville mentioned there were some clips from OTAs where Baker and Trask were overthrowing receivers. Yes!
I saw that. Yeah, that was bad.
Right. We put a lot of those clips, and they were bad. But just like the clip of Trey Lance, with a perfect motion on his throw. We'll spin some of these clips into some pretty major stories.
Hey, Bob, do you remember? I'm old enough to remember hearing or reading a headline from Patrick Mahomes before his first season as a starter saying he threw 4 interceptions in a practice. Do you remember that from a few years ago?
I do remember that.
So it's just I'm not saying Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield are the second coming of Patrick Mahomes, but I am saying that new quarterbacks or quarterbacks taking over for their teams in new situations, you're probably going to see stuff like that over the offseason. It's May. Give it some time for them to get in sync with their receivers.
Right. I'm not saying anyone in Tampa Bay is going to end up being Geno Smith. Also, I did not think Geno Smith was going to end up being Geno Smith this time last year. So things to watch there. Before a question gets away from me, JSC in the chat wanted to know if you are picking between the 2, Zay Flowers or Quentin Johnston, what would your selection be, young man?
So let's see, Zay Flowers with the Ravens, Quentin Johnston with the Chargers. I'm going to lean towards Quentin Johnston. I think that's where I'm going to lean towards, just given the rapport that Lamar Jackson already has with Mark Andrews. And I'm trying to think of once they get into the red zone, not as concerned with just the total volume or stuff that happens in between the 20s. So I think between the 2 of them, between those 2 offenses, with Baltimore potentially being more pass heavy, the overall volume and yardage might shake out to be even. But in the red zone, I'm trying to think of what's going to happen for Baltimore once they get into the red zone. Going to be a target to Mark Andrews. Lamar obviously is going to try and scoot on in there if he can. Maybe they hand the ball off to J.K. Dobbins, because at least traditionally they've been more run friendly than pass happy. And now, conversely, think about how the Chargers have operated, or at least how we think they're going to operate with the switch from Lombardi to Kellen Moore. They've been more pass friendly, definitely. Like over the past few seasons, the Chargers have been top 10-ish, if not higher, in pass rate over expectation, and also looking for viable pass catchers once they get into the red zone. That's where they've kind of faltered. I mean, of course, Austin Eckler is going to get his. I think he led all running backs last season in terms of red zone targets. They still got like Mike Williams. We'll see about his health. Keenan Allen, also see about his health. So it's like there is some uncertainty there, even with Gerald Everett. I mean, all aging options like for Justin Herbert. So if there's a chance, I see a chance for a guy like Johnston to kind of cut into that type of work. He'll probably get his third down targets, maybe targets like down the seam, because he is that speedy receiver that can stretch the field. Unlike what Michael Bandy, DeAndre Carter, Josh Palmer, they were trying to use last year. So I can see Johnston already taking over that role. I can see Johnston having a role on third down so that the offense can be more efficient. And I can see him having more of a role once they get into the red zone versus what I can't see that happening for Zay Flowers with the Ravens. So I think I lean more towards Johnston, even though if I'm remembering right, was it Zay Flowers that was drafted first or was it Johnson? I don't remember offhand. Yeah, so either way, so like even though Flowers has like the slightly higher draft capital, I think Johnston's situation is a bit more fantasy friendly comparatively.
Yeah, Johnston was I want to say, am I correct? I want to say the third, but let me just double check that because it was Smith. No, Johnston was second. I'm sorry. Jackson.
Oh, okay, he was second.
Johnston, yeah, Johnson, 2021, 22, and 23 with Addison going last. So I thought as soon as I said that, I said, I should check that because I sound stupid when I say wrong thing. John Bonneville, really pertinent comment here. Chargers need to increase the yards per attempt. That was the issue last year, right? Way too many checkdowns, as John said. And I think this will fix that. Eyeball test-wise, people, Quentin Johnston looks like a player, man. He is a big body. I know there are people who have, talked about his catching, a little too much batting at the ball, and maybe a little trouble getting separation. We'll find out about all that. But boy, he looks the part, and I think he lands in a good spot because we'll see, definitely for beyond this year. You had mentioned early in the chat Jordan Addison. I think everyone's really enthusiastic about him, just the way this offense has been designed. We're hearing maybe a little talk to Dalvin Cook. We might gain a little clarity here by the end of the week. I was starting to lean towards him sticking around. Now I'm starting to lean towards him moving on as a post-June 1 trade, it sounds like. So two things. What are your thoughts on this passing attack? Also, what are your thoughts on Alexander Mattison if there is no Dalvin Cook in Minnesota?
So for the passing attack, I'm trying to get as much exposure to Minnesota's passing game as I possibly can. And while historically Kirk Cousins has kind of been that quarterback that you get excited about him, but then the regular season starts and you're just like, why did I draft this dude? I knew this was going to happen at some point, because he will have those blow-up games. The game where it's like he'll throw for 250 yards, but then and maybe a touchdown, but then have like 2 picks and a fumble. Or the thing that's still stuck in my mind is the last pass that he threw, that little 5-yard pass to TJ Hawkinson on third down when it was like 3rd and 15. So That's the way that Kirk Cousins can operate, and I get that. But this is the same offense that jumped from middle of the league in terms of pass rate over expectation in the 2021 season to top 5, top 6 in pass rate over expectation in year 1 with Kevin O'Connell. It's the same offense now became more aggressive in obvious passing situations. I mean, Kirk Cousins was rifling the ball to Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson after they made the trade for Hawkinson around like the week 8, week 9 time frame. And those were the 2 pass catchers. I mean, those are the primary pass catchers like for Kirk Cousins. So that's why I'm excited for Jordan Addison. In a study that I had done just looking at pass rate over expectation for Fantasy Life, folks can go check that out if they get a chance. Really the continuity from season to season for PROE, that really holds steady if it's the coaching staff and the primary pass catching core. If that stays, there's continuity there, you will see teams continue to operate in a similar fashion. That's why we've seen Patrick Mahomes continue to be in the top 2 or 3 in terms of PROE. Same thing with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Zach Taylor with all of them in Cincinnati. And we can see the same thing with Minnesota this year. So if Minnesota, knowing their deficiencies on defense, and they also used a second round pick to grab TJ Hawkinson during the middle of last year, and they still decided to use their early round draft capital on one of the, I wouldn't say the number one wide receiver, one of the top receiver prospects in this class, that at least signals to me that they're going to continue their pass happy ways in 2023. And with only having one reliable wide receiver, not pass catcher, one other a reliable receiver in Justin Jefferson, they knew they needed a reliable wide receiver too. And that's going to be Jordan Addison. And so while he's been like Addison from a best ball standpoint, his ADP it's a little high for me right now. But if I can get exposure to that Minnesota passing game as much as possible, that's where I think is going to be like a ton of value over the entirety of the 2023 season, just because we know they're going to be passing and we know where most of the targets are going to go, whether it's Justin Jefferson, who's sitting at the 101, I think, in most drafts, TJ Hawkinson, or potentially Jordan Addison.
Right. Remember, Adam Thielen had 100 targets there last year. I think KJ Osborne had, 70, 97?
Yeah, and a nice late round dart. Yeah, Osborne's a good dart too.
I think they threw 64% of the time. So plenty of meat on that passing bone. Mr. Scamper's in the chat. That's the way the cookie crumbles. Well played, Mr.
I like
Scamper.
That.
And by the way, you mentioned that play to Hawkinson. I mean, that play sticks out to me. I think we get these negative vibes about players, or the notion that he can't play well, Kirk Cousins, in primetime games, etc. Those are all there for a reason, people. But that's not to say he doesn't. Those are the things that stick in our mind more so than the consistently solid production over time. You find him in the top 10 often after the season is over. So look for the price in that. KJ Osborne is a great third wide receiver. I think he is still going to be a great third wide receiver. John Bonneville noting the additions of Josh Oliver and keeping CJ Ham, maybe suggests some of the formations they'll be using, maybe more of a San Francisco KC type of offense than the Rams, and that may well be. I think that's not an unreasonable expectation. We'll see what Alexander Mattison turns out to be. Would you be interested in him as the only piece in that backfield if he were the only piece? And what is his ADP right now? I think he's starting to rise because people are starting to expect. Let me just take a quick look.
Where is he getting drafted?
Currently on best ball 10s. It's felt really cheap. 37 after Zach Charbonnet, after Jamal Williams, after Khalil Herbert. I mean, this might be a good speculative play, people, until we get a little clarity, or maybe wait till you get the clarity. I don't know. If you want to cash
even if you don't get the
value, right?
Yeah. I think even if you don't get the clarity, having him as the RB2 in that offense, if Dalvin Cook he's not able to suit up any particular week. I think last season, it was his first full 17 or full season, if I'm remembering correctly, without being out with injury. But in the times where Cook hasn't been in the lineup and Madison has had to take over, he's finished as a top 12 or a running back, I think, in 5 of the 6 times that he's had more than 50% of the snaps. He's been the RB 7, 9, 5, and 4 in those games. I think one time he finished as the RB 13 in half-point PPR scoring. That's across the 2020 and 2021 season, since Cook was available throughout the entirety of 2022. And that's fantasy production. But even if you want to look at just projected touches, he's averaged over 80% of the running back touches across those 5 games, where he was essentially the man in the backfield. He was able to secure 107 of 120 running back targets. So he turns into a bell cow at that point. And that type of workload, you're not going to find in the anywhere past round 5 or 6 typically. So if I can capture that workload at this cost, and then we'll see what plays out. If there's a restructure, a contract restructure, or let's say he gets traded or whatever, regardless of if Cook is on the team or not, having a player on your roster that, if Cook wasn't available, can capture most of a huge share of the workload and is also part of a productive offense, that's the archetype of running back that I would want to draft anyway.
Chasing that volume. Kevin O'Connell was talking him up just, what was it, today or yesterday? So Madison, that is. Brian Larkin would like to know if there's any chance Dwayne McBride ends up being the featured back in Minnesota if Cook goes. I will say no. What do you say, Chris?
I also say no. It's hard for me to to think about just where I think he would have the early down work I don't see a problem with that. Just thinking about like his size, speed profile, I don't see a problem with that. I do wonder about like the short yardage, like the short yardage work as well. So for me, it's a little bit tricky to just pencil him in as like the RB1 in that. I would think they would bring somebody in. Do you think they'd also do that?
I think they probably would. I'll just paraphrase our friend Matt Waldman from the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Not big on Dwayne McBride. I think he would call him the Kane Nwangwu of Ty Chandler's, meaning bottom of the depth.
Yeah.
Bottom of the depth
Yeah.
charts. I took a little bit. So yeah. Look, the funny thing about running backs, just in particular, I mean, players are going to rise up out of nowhere. I think McBride's path to rising up is a little more arduous than others, especially with Madison there and the money they paid him. They gave him a nice new, pretty fat contract. He's only running back with significant money passed this year. What would be a good spot for TJ Hawkinson on draft day? For me, it's shifting, Chris. He was pretty solidly in as the second tight end on my board. And I got a lot of shares of him at that price. Now I'm starting to not get those shares because I feel like I'm kind of, at least, I don't want to say oversaturated, but I feel like I'm oversaturated at the price. What are your expectations? Has he moved? Where is he at in your rankings? And maybe you talk a little bit about that top group of tight ends and how you feel about George Kittle if Brock Purdy is indeed looking like he's going to be ready to go.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Just thinking about what the San Francisco offense is going to look like, whether it's Purdy or now they're saying Lance is the one taking over, getting the first team reps, or we'll see if we see Sam Darnold getting some reps as well. But back to he could. But back to the Vikings, I think as of right now, I've got him as my tight end 4, if I'm remembering correctly. Let me pull that up real quick. Let me go and check it and make sure before I say something that's inaccurate. That sounds about right. I mean,
I love checking.
Yeah, because if you're just looking at tight end 3, so just right ahead of Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson, and then Kyle Pitts after that, because with the way that Hawkinson was immediately able to capture essentially the wide receiver 2 role, not even like the tight end, he became like the guy for Kirk Cousins in obvious passing situations. If I'm remembering the stat correctly, from week 9, essentially after Hawkinson became a part of the Vikings, he was tied or just right behind Justin Jefferson in targets on 3rd and 4th down. And then for red zone targets, he matched Justin Jefferson like in red zone targets, or just probably right behind him as well. So if I'm getting a tight end that's getting most of the targets, has that rapport already with the quarterback, and also being able to having those shots in the end zone, and that's really what we need for the tight end position. Those guys that, I mean, they might get some yardage, but we need them to be able to fall into the end zone every week or so. So if Hawkinson has that on a pass happy offense, putting him in the tight end 3, tight end 4 range, I think is the best spot for him right now in best ball drafts.
Yeah, I throw the stat out, but there was a 3-game stretch last year where Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson were tied for the most targets in the NFL with 37 apiece. So JSC wants to know, is there a sliver of a chance I get Kittle or Hawkinson in round 6 or later? Probably not. I haven't seen that.
I don't think so.
I think
I don't think so.
Right, round 5 or earlier for both those guys.
I'm wondering though, let's say, because we're hearing stuff about Trey Lance kind of taking over as the QB1 like for San Francisco. Let's play out this scenario. Let me know what you think, Bob. So we're in, let's say, mid-July, and we get the report from like one of the beat reporters saying that Trey Lance is struggling with this 49ers offense and Kyle Shanahan isn't happy. Meanwhile, at the same time, Brock Purdy's Shanahan is non-committal about Brock Purdy's rehabilitation process, and that leaves us with Sam Darnold. How apt would you be to draft somebody like George Kittle if you knew it was going to be Sam Darnold under center for the San Francisco 49ers in week 1? Would that drop his ADP enough for us to get into that 6th round zone? I think it might if we got Sam Darnold.
I think it would. And by the way, you're speaking of Trey Lance, who will by that time be the quarterback of the Las Vegas Raiders, right? No, I'm speaking that into existence.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think this all depends on how we feel about where Kittle goes. Will totally depend on how we feel about the quarterback, whoever it is. And if it's not Brock Purdy, I will feel less love for George Kittle. They seem to have a really nice connection, and Purdy executing the offense the way it's supposed to be executed in the mind of Kyle Shanahan means we'll see plenty of George Kittle. So I like that as well. Let's talk about that Raiders situation a little bit. I mean, all the contract talk about Jimmy Garoppolo, if the foot's okay, I think the most likely outcome here is the foot is okay, at least to open the season.
Yeah.
But could you see them making a move at quarterback and making an addition along the way? Because I don't know if Brian Hoyer is a man to carry him. I know they have a rookie there, and I've talked to people on the scene. They feel pretty good about him. I don't know a lot about Aiden O'Connell, except maybe another one of those guys going, that's kind of hoping to catch a little Brock Purdy vibe or something. I don't know. What could you see them making a move for, let's say, a Bailey Zappi or somebody?
I was going to go even a bit bolder than that. Let's say, what if they find themselves in some sort of AFC West battle? I don't know how that happens unless something terrible happens to Kansas City and the same thing happens for the Chargers, although something terrible seems to happen for the Chargers every single season. So that's not outside of the realm of possibility. But let's just say that they are in the hunt for the division title. What if they make a play for a guy like Jameis Winston that's just been kind of routing away in New Orleans, and they'd at least have some sense, like some viable option for quarterback one past Jimmy Garoppolo? Because that's really the question that I have
Right.
for the Raiders.
Eddie Bridgewater.
Yeah, Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, some sort of like a more viable bridge quarterback, because you know what you have with Jimmy G. He's fine if you're just trying to get through the season or whatever. And like Kyle Shanahan has propped him up for a number of years. But if you do want to try and push it, if you want to try and figure out what this offense could be, then a guy like Jameis Winston could potentially do that for you. Let's assume he has some of the interceptions and accuracy issues, or a guy like Teddy Bridgewater would probably be the better or safer option. But somebody like that, I think, would be a better option for them to get past the 2023 season. Let's say if the Jimmy thing doesn't work out, just because if you look at the way that Devontae Adams plays the game, or a guy like Hunter Renfrow plays the game, and those are guys that, while they can play like downfield if they need to, Devontae Adams was still taking passes at 20 air yards or more last season, even though he's probably getting closer to the end of his career. But they also take those routes across the middle of the field, tons of shallow crossers, passes, routes like that would allow for yards after the catch. And that's kind of been Jimmy Garoppolo's bugaboo, passing across the middle. And it just worked out well when he had like Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle to run after the catch. But he won't necessarily have that with either the pass catchers that he has, like with Las Vegas. So I do have some concerns about even the short-term viability for Jimmy in that offense. And it might necessitate them making a move for a guy that might be a bit more stable in that position, like Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis, or whatever free agents might still be out there.
Andrea thinks Jimmy G is so hurt they don't want to let on. I think that's true. My watch is telling me right now that Tom Brady, there's been a lot of talk about this, right? That Brady would take a unanimous. So Brady is buying a portion or a minority ownership in the Raiders, right? They've confirmed that. The initial talk was that it would take a unanimous vote of all the other owners for him to be allowed to play while he's an owner. According to a report that is just now hitting my devices, that would only require 24 votes. That's not totally unrealistic, right? 20. I mean, I could see like everybody in the AFC West voting against it. I could see the Buccaneers voting, a handful of teams, but that kind of opens the door to that. We'll see about all this. JSC wants to know. Royal Slave, Brady's done. He's not playing. I agree with that, actually. How do we feel about Chris Olave early versus Michael Thomas later? And it is fairly late, and it's fairly early for Olave. I'll bring up the ADPs. Just give me your initial thoughts there.
I like rookies that are capable of earning high percentage of their team's targets and air yards in their rookie season. Now, granted, for Chris Olave, his target competition was, I'll just say, minimal, to be polite. But the fact that he was able to do it, produce at a high level, I mean, that's all that I'm looking for at this point. So let's assume that Michael Thomas is back to even 60 to 70% of his old self. haven't really seen any. I have not seen any videos of MT out there running or doing any football related activities that would lead me to believe that he's going to be just like fully ready and there's going to be the Michael Thomas of old and we're going to get, can't guard Mike out there on the field and it's just going to be like this 1-2 punch with him and Olave. I haven't seen that. So right now I have no problems drafting Olave where he's at right now. Folks will list off the pass catchers. Oh, okay. Yeah. So like they'll list off the pass catchers that the Saints have right now and say, oh, who is it? Juwan Thompson, like out there learning, taking Julian Edelman tape, and he's going to be like their new big slot receiver. And Alvin Kamara, even after he comes back, he's going to be another pass catcher. And it's like there's going to be all this competition for Olave. But with the way that he played last year, we know that he's capable of earning targets at a high rate. I'll just continue to bet on the talent there, even with the quarterback change. I'm not a huge Derek Carr guy, but even still, he can, if he's capable of earning targets the way that he had last year, shouldn't be an issue in year 2 for him.
Chris, I don't like to call guests out, but I mean the total slander here for Rashid Shaheed, who has packed on 5 pounds of muscle. 5 pounds of muscle, sir.
That is true.
By the way, John Bonville, and now that you've said it, I haven't really thought about this, Chris, but John mentions we've seen more video of Javonte running than we have of Michael Thomas. And by the way, Thomas only recently had the hardware removed from his foot, so he may not be able to do a damn thing. So that is an interesting point there. And Juwan Johnson, you mentioned him. I do think, the Foster Moreau kind of throws the vibe off. I'm pretty heavily invested in Juwan Johnson early on. Totally cheap guy. And I'm happy doing that. Let's look at some of the cheap guys that are out there at some of the various positions. We've got a few minutes left. If you've got questions for Chris, you should ask them because he has fantastic answers, as you've all heard over the course of the last 52 minutes. It's been fantastic. But quarterbacks, Geno Smith, Jared Goff, why does the world hate them?
I think they're still considering them to be one-hit wonders. I think people will look at the body of work and say that, well, I've seen Geno Smith when he was a part of the Jets. And gosh, wasn't he the one that got punched in the mouth at some point in the Jets locker room? So like we remember all of the trials and tribulations for Geno Smith and seeing him operate as one of the most efficient quarterbacks last season, one of the most accurate, he was the most accurate quarterback. He led the league in completion percentage over expected last season. We can at least subconsciously write that off as an outlier season. And the same thing for Jared Goff. We remember this is the same Jared Goff that got depanced by Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl, however many years ago, that needed some of the best surroundings of having a talent like Brandon Cook as a wide receiver, having just a god at running back with Todd Gurley, and one of the best offensive lines, best offensive systems with Sean McVay. He needed all that around him in order to get them to the Super Bowl, and then they just got run over. So we know like it's the history that drags most of their value down, regardless of the talent that surrounded them. I mean, for Geno Smith, having Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, now JSN, if you want to factor in Zach Charbonnet, who's a solid, fairly decent, efficient pass catcher coming out of college, and also being in an offensive system that plays to its strengths, having one of the better pass blocking offensive lines in the league that's just looking at PFF's like offensive grade ranking system that they have out there. I mean, regardless of the infrastructure that surrounds Geno Smith, we'll always still remember just him not being consistent or him being inefficient and inaccurate throughout most of his career, and we'll just dismiss that as an outlier. And the same thing for Jared Goff. Like, we love Amon-Ra St. Brown. We love this idea of them drafting Jamar Gibbs with their first round pick. Like, all of the talent surrounding it. Jameson Williams, despite the 6-game suspension, once he comes back, juggernaut. Love Jameson Williams. It's just, we like all of the pieces, but then when you look at the quarterback, it's like, well, I know that at some point, Jared Goff, once he gets pressure in his face, he's going to crumble. Yeah, that's probably true. But how often is that going to happen, especially behind Detroit's offensive line? Is like, what, top 5, top 6 in terms of pass blocking grade? So I try and take an infrastructure view when it comes to those types of quarterbacks, because if I like all the pieces around them, something's got to give here regarding the quarterback value. And with Geno Smith and Jared Goff, I do like them as like high end, like quarterback twos, just given the receivers that I'm always targeting in drafts.
Aaron Martinez asking a follow-up about Foster Moreau tight end one. I don't know. I don't know that he is or isn't right now. I think it's too early to say, but he does have a connection with Derek Carr. So that's, it's a concern for me that he's in there. And congratulations to him for overcoming lymphoma and getting back in, and feel great for him. A few comments in here, and I do think some of them, speaking of Javonte Samaje, as cheap he is. Irv Smith's season is upon us. I've been saying this for many years now, and it has not happened. I'm hoping this is the case in Cincinnati. We'll see talk that he's coming into his own. JSC feels like people are forgetting how good Justin Herbert could actually be, and I really like Trevor Lawrence in the middle rounds currently. He's not lasting to the middle rounds for me. Neither is Justin Herbert, by the way. Ryan remembers Geno coming in to cover when Wilson went down. That was not great. How would you rank Justin Herbert, Lawrence, Jackson, and Fields? What order do you have those fellows?
So who again? Justin Herbert.
Herbert, Lawrence, Jackson, and Fields.
All right, so I would go Fields first, Jackson after that, Herbert, and then Lawrence. I just have, out of the four of them, I have the most concern, I think, with Trevor Lawrence. And it's not him, but it's just, do you believe that Calvin Ridley, at his age and also the amount of time that he spent away from the game, can he really help bring this offense into the 2023 season, like where we see Trevor Lawrence vault into the top 7 discussion? I guess that's really my only hesitation. Like Christian Kirk, solid. Evan Ingram, decent tight end too. Have no problems with where he's drafted at. I like Zay Jones as a decent, like late round, like wide receiver 3 type dart. I have just some reservations about this idea that while Calvin Ridley was a high end, like a decent wide receiver 1, almost in the way that we think about DJ Moore now, like a good receiver, good wide receiver 1, but after the time that he spent away from the game, is he capable of actually supporting or bringing Trevor Lawrence and actually helping him meet the ADP that he's currently sitting at? That's just my only hang up.
I believe we'll find out, right? I just think this is an ascending offense. John Bonneville, I'm going to be a Ridley believer, but I was also a Michael Pittman and Cortland Sutton believer last year. Guilty as charged also, John. So
same. I was there.
Right. So, like, people were asking about some later round running backs. They mentioned Samaje Perine, who I think is going ridiculously late. I will say that, and I don't want to overstate the case, but Jerick McKinnon was running back 2 over the final 6 weeks of the season. I think he's going ridiculously cheap now that he is back with the Chiefs. But I mean, some of the guys down in this range: Samaje Perine 44, Deontay Foreman 45, Devin Singletary 47. But let's get into the last one here, because I think this is a Gordian knot of some proportion. I want you to untie it. Raheem Mostert, 49. Devin A-Chain, 50. Jeff Wilson, 52. My guy McKinnon right in there, 51. What are you doing with the Miami backfield? No one stands out price-wise. What are you doing?
I'm just going to go with the guy that I believe can take the top off the defense and why he was drafted in the first place. I'm just going to continue to draft A-Chain. It made too much sense. It's almost like it made too much sense before the draft that they would target a guy like A-Chain, and them actually doing it when they did. I mean, giving him like day 2 draft capital. I mean, that to me just signals that they want to try and put him into that type of situation, whether he's capable of handling the load, being the guy that they kind of work in, let's say maybe in like third down, obvious passing situations, 2-minute drill, whatever. I think that's where they'll try and pigeonhole him at the start and then see how he works in between the tackles and if he can actually handle the load like Mostert and Wilson have in the past. But I want to swing for upside. I want to swing for, especially in like the best ball tournaments, who's going to be around. Like once you get into week 13, 14, 15, like when we're trying to make some money here. I mean, we expecting Mostert and Wilson at their ages to still be available 4 months later. I would bet on the rookie a bit more, and also the rookie that has better pass catching skills than the other two. Because if we're thinking about the Miami offense, it's been Tyreek Hill, it's been Jalen Waddle. They haven't. Mike Gesicki could not get involved. Cedric Wilson, Albert Wilson. I mean, any of the other wide receivers attached to that offense haven't been able to earn targets. But for me, with the way that Miami, the draft capital they used to actually get a guy like A-Chain that was an efficient pass catcher, that at least signals that they're going to try and work him in as that third receiver that they most desperately need at this point to continue moving the ball. So I'll take some swings on A-Chain and that elite speed that he's got in order to go with the elite speed of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
They've all got a fair amount of speed, all well suited for this offense, and I think it's going to be. I'm hoping John Bonneville throws out there. Can't wait for the HA training camp clips to start hitting the feed. Yeah. I can't either because I think that starts driving down the price of the piece. I'm most interested in, not named A-Chain, will be Jeff Wilson Jr., so we'll find out. Everybody, you found out a lot today because Chris Allen was here. Chris Allen's fantastic. You should follow him on Twitter. It's a tricky one. Go to my Twitter feed. It's Chris at Chris Allen FFWX. There's a story behind that we won't get into. At Chris Allen FFWX. Find his work at Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life, fantasylife.com. Tons of great content there, as you all know. And Chris has been a great addition to their team, and love seeing you there. Congratulations on that. And thanks again, man, for coming on. A few people I enjoy having these kind of chats with, so really appreciate your time and having you come on here. And we'll do it again soon. Get you on the radio. By the way, the radio show, it's Football Diehards. It's on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. This weekend, we're doing a Simulation Saturday. If you remember Mock Draft Mondays, Simulation Saturday, it'll be me, Matt Donnelly, Mike Dempsey, Eric Romoff, each with 3 teams, drafting at breakneck speed and doing quick instant analysis on all that. So tune in there, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Also, there's a ongoing all-time greats team draft going on with Sirius. We just got Adrian Peterson with pick 10, so check that out. It's on the at SiriusXM Fantasy timeline. Appreciate y'all coming. Look, you have a choice. There's a lot of content out there. I appreciate you spending some time with me. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit Chris up. Check out his Twitter feed and find all his great work that you find in Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Chris, thank you, young man.
Of course, anytime, Bob. You know I'll be there.
I know you will. All right, everybody. Take care. We'll see you next